Useless girl. You can't even sweep properly. I'm sorry, Ma. Sorry? Sorry doesn't clean my house. You have 30 minutes to redo this entire floor. If I see even one speck of dust, you'll sleep outside tonight. Do you hear me?
Yes, Ma.
She was 23 years old. She'd been working in this house for 8 months, and every single day felt like punishment for a crime she didn't commit.
She has it too easy. 3 inches of the hay. She forgets where she came from. The gutter, the streets. Thank God I don't have a child.
Useless girl. You can't even sweep properly. The slap came hard and fast, snapping Grace's head to the side. She didn't cry out. She'd learned long ago that tears only made it worse. Mrs. Adunni Williams stood over her, chest heaving with rage, her expensive Gucci slides just inches from where Grace knelt on the marble floor of the Leckie mansion. "I'm sorry, Ma," Grace whispered, her cheek burning. "Sorry? Sorry doesn't clean my house." Adunni grabbed the broom from Grace's hands and threw it across the room. "You have 30 minutes to redo this entire floor. If I see even one speck of dust, you'll sleep outside tonight. Do you hear me?" "Yes, Ma." Adunni stormed off, her silk robe flowing behind her like a flag of victory, and Grace waited until she heard the bedroom door slam before she allowed herself to breathe. She was 23 years old. She'd been working in this house for 8 months, and every single day felt like punishment for a crime she didn't commit. Grace picked up the broom with shaking hands and started again. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the Lagos skyline glittering in the evening sun. Somewhere out there, people were living normal lives. People had families who loved them. People had mothers who didn't look at them with disgust. Grace had none of that. She was an orphan, had been for as long as she could remember. Sister Mary at the orphanage in Mushin used to tell her she'd been left at their gate as a baby, wrapped in a dirty cloth with no note, no name, no explanation. "Well, you were a gift from God," Sister Mary would say, smiling kindly. "He has a plan for you." Grace wondered what kind of plan involved being slapped by a woman who seemed to hate her very existence. Pause for a moment and think about this. Have you ever mistreated someone without knowing their full story? Ever judged a housemaid, a security guard, a stranger, assuming they're beneath you? What if the person you're looking down on is connected to you in ways you can't imagine? Hit subscribe now because what you're about to discover in this story will haunt you for days. This isn't just about a maid and her madam, it's about karma, blood and secrets that destroy everything. Like this video if you believe every person deserves dignity, regardless of their position in life. The next 10 minutes will reveal a truth so devastating you'll never look at household help the same way again. The orphanage had closed 3 years ago due to lack of funding. At 20, Grace had found herself on the streets with nothing but a primary school education and hands that knew how to work. She'd done everything to survive, sold pure water in traffic, washed clothes for neighbors in Ajagunle, cleaned offices at night. Then 8 months ago, she'd seen the advert, "Live-in housemaid needed, Leckie. Good pay." She'd never imagined good pay would come with such a high cost. Adunni Williams was one of the most successful businesswomen in Lagos. She owned a chain of beauty supply stores across the city and had just launched her own cosmetics line. Her face was on billboards, and her success story had been featured in magazines. From poverty to prosperity, how Adunni Williams built an empire. To the outside world, she was an inspiration. Inside her home, she was a tyrant. Grace scrubbed the floors until her knees ached. By the time she finished, the sun had set and her stomach was growling. She hadn't eaten since the small portion of rice she'd been given that morning. "Grace," Adunni's voice rang out from upstairs. Grace climbed the stairs slowly, her body exhausted. She found Adunni in her bedroom, sitting at her vanity, removing her jewelry. "Yes, Ma? My friends are coming tomorrow for a meeting. I want the house spotless, the china set polished, fresh flowers in every room, and if you embarrass me in front of them..." Adunni met her eyes in the mirror. "You know what will happen." Grace nodded. She knew. Last time guests had come, Adunni had accused her of stealing a bracelet that had simply been misplaced. Grace had been locked in the boys' quarters for 2 days without food. "You can go," Adunni said dismissively. Grace turned to leave. "Wait." She stopped. Adunni was staring at her with an odd expression, something Grace couldn't quite read. "How old did you say you were?" 23, Ma. "And you have no family?" No one at all? Grace shook her head. No, Ma. I grew up in an orphanage. Something flickered across Aduni's face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. Get out, she said coldly. Grace retreated to the boys' quarters, a small room behind the main house where she slept on a thin mattress on the floor. She sat in the darkness, rubbing her sore cheek, and did what she always did when the loneliness became unbearable. She imagined her mother, not the woman who had abandoned her, but the mother she'd created in her mind, kind, warm, someone who would have held her when she cried, someone who would have fought for her. Grace didn't know why she'd been left at that orphanage gate 23 years ago, but she'd spent her whole life wondering if her mother ever thought about her, if she ever regretted it, if she was even still alive. 24 years earlier, Aduni Okoro was 19 years old when she realized she was pregnant. 19, unmarried and terrified. Her boyfriend, Tunde, had been a university student from a wealthy family. She'd been a hairdresser's apprentice in Mushin, dreaming of someday owning her own salon. They'd met at a party. He'd made promises. She'd believed them. When she told him about the baby, he'd laughed. You think I'm going to ruin my future for some girl from the ghetto? He'd given her 5,000 naira and told her to handle it. Aduni had gone home and cried for 3 days. Her own mother had died when she was 15. Her father was a drunk who barely noticed she existed. She had no money, no support, no options. She couldn't afford to raise a child, and she couldn't afford to abort it either. So when Sister Mary at the orphanage told her about an arrangement, a wealthy couple who would pay for the baby, no questions asked, Aduni had been desperate enough to listen. 50,000 naira. That's what they offered her. 50,000 naira for the baby she was carrying. Aduni told herself it was the right choice. The baby would have a better life. She would have money to start over. Everyone would win. She gave birth in a small clinic in Mushin. The baby was a girl. Aduni held her for exactly 5 minutes. 5 minutes to memorize her face, her tiny fingers, the small birthmark on her left shoulder blade that looked like a half moon. Then the couple took her away, and Aduni took the money and tried to forget. Before we continue, ask yourself this question. If you made a terrible mistake decades ago, sold something precious because you were desperate, and that mistake came back to haunt you in the cruelest way possible, would you deserve forgiveness? What's about to happen will answer that question in the most tragic way imaginable. Subscribe if you're still watching, because the collision between past and present is about to get brutal. And comment karma if you believe what goes around always comes around, even 23 years later. The woman who sold her baby is about to hire her as a maid, and neither of them knows. But forgetting was impossible. For years she saw that baby's face everywhere, in crowds, in dreams, in quiet moments when she was alone. The guilt ate at her like acid. She threw herself into work, used the money to start a small business selling beauty products at Oshodi Market, worked 18-hour days to avoid thinking, built her business slowly, carefully, ruthlessly. She never had another child, never married, never let anyone close enough to ask why. By the time she was 43, Aduni Williams was rich, successful, respected, but she was also empty. The guilt had never left. It had just learned to hide in the corners of her mind, emerging at night when she was alone in her big house, surrounded by luxury that felt meaningless. She told herself she'd done the right thing, that the baby, wherever she was, had lived a good life with that wealthy couple. She had to believe that, because if she didn't, the truth would destroy her. Present day. The next morning, Grace woke at 5 a.m. to begin preparations for Aduni's meeting. She polished the china until it gleamed, arranged fresh roses in crystal vases, prepared a spread of small chops and drinks. By the time the guests arrived at 2 p.m., the house looked like a magazine spread. Aduni's friends were all successful women like her, designers, business owners, socialites. Here they air-kissed and complimented each other's outfits, while Grace served drinks silently, trying to be invisible. "Aduni, this house is stunning," one woman exclaimed. "Thank you, darling. I just renovated," Aduni replied, not acknowledging Grace's existence, even as Grace handed her a glass of champagne. Grace retreated to the kitchen, grateful to be out of sight. But as she was arranging more snacks on a tray, She heard a gasp from the living room. Oh my God! Aduni! The voice was sharp, shocked. Grace peeked around the corner. An older woman, probably in her 60s, stood frozen in the doorway. She wore a nurse's uniform and was staring at Grace with wide eyes. "Sister Mary?" the woman said, her voice shaking. "Is that you?" Grace blinked, confused. "No, Ma, my name is Grace." The woman moved closer, her eyes scanning Grace's face like she was searching for something. "Grace? Grace from the orphanage? In Mushin?" Grace's heart skipped. "Yes, Ma. How did you—" "I was a midwife there, years ago. I helped Sister Mary deliver—" The woman stopped abruptly, her eyes darting to Aduni. "Stop, right here. This is the moment everything changes." That nurse just recognized something. A face, a birthmark. A girl she saw 23 years ago as a newborn baby being sold. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what's about to be revealed will shatter everything you thought you knew about this story. Drop it in the comments if you just realized what's about to happen. Some secrets are too heavy to stay buried. Some sins find you when you least expect it. And what's about to happen to Aduni Williams will prove that the cruelest punishment is the one you inflict on yourself without even knowing. Keep watching. You're not ready for this. Aduni had gone completely pale. "Grace, go to your room," she said, her voice tight. "But Ma, Now!" Grace fled to the boys' quarters, her heart pounding. She pressed her ear to the door, trying to hear what was happening inside. The voices were muffled at first. Then they grew louder. "Can't be. I'm telling you, it's her. The birthmark. I saw it when she was serving. You need to tell her." Then silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Grace heard footsteps, the front door opening and closing, car engines starting, the guests leaving earlier than planned. Then nothing. An hour passed. Grace didn't dare come out. She sat on her thin mattress, wondering what had just happened. Why had that woman recognized her? What birthmark was she talking about? Finally, as the sun began to set, there was a knock on her door. Grace opened it. Aduni stood there. But this wasn't the cold, imperious woman Grace had come to know. This was someone different. Someone broken. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hands trembled. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past few hours. "Grace," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I need to see your shoulder." "Ma?" "Your left shoulder, please." Confused and frightened, Grace turned and pulled down the collar of her worn shirt, exposing her left shoulder blade. The gasp that came from Aduni was raw and animalistic. Grace spun around. "Ma? What's wrong?" Aduni sank to her knees right there in the doorway, her whole body shook with sobs. "No," she kept saying. "No, no, no. Ma, I don't understand." "The birthmark." Aduni looked up at Grace with eyes full of devastation. "It's shaped like a half-moon, exactly like—" She couldn't finish. Grace touched her shoulder self-consciously. She'd had that birthmark her whole life, had never thought anything of it. 23 years ago, Aduni said through tears, I gave birth to a baby girl in Mushin. I was poor, desperate. I sold her to a couple for 50,000 naira. I held her for 5 minutes before they took her away. Grace's blood turned to ice. She had a birthmark on her left shoulder blade, shaped like a half-moon. The world tilted. No. No, it couldn't be. That nurse, Aduni continued, her voice breaking, she was there that day. She helped deliver my baby. When she saw you today, saw that birthmark when you were serving drinks, she knew. Grace backed away, shaking her head violently. No, you're lying. The couple who was supposed to take you, they died in a car accident 2 days after I gave you to them. The nurse just told me. She said you were brought back to the orphanage. They named you Grace because no one knew your real name. They didn't know how to find me. I had disappeared. Started over. Stop, Grace whispered. I've been abusing my own daughter. Adoni's voice cracked completely. For 8 months, I've been treating you like you were nothing. And all along, you were the baby I gave away. The baby I've thought about every single day for 23 years. Grace felt like she couldn't breathe. Her legs gave out and she sank to the floor. This woman, this cruel, hateful woman who had slapped her, starved her, degraded her, was her mother. No, Grace said again, but this time it came out as a sob. Aduni crawled toward her. I'm sorry. Oh God, I'm so sorry. If I had known. If you had known what? Grace's voice turned sharp through her tears. You would have treated me differently. So it's okay to abuse someone as long as they're not your blood. Aduni flinched as if she'd been struck. I looked for you, Grace said, tears streaming down her face. My whole life, I wondered about my mother. I imagined she must have had a good reason for giving me up. That maybe she was too young, too poor, too something. I told myself maybe she thought about me sometimes. Maybe she regretted it. I did, Aduni sobbed, every day. And then I find out my mother is you? Grace laughed bitterly. The woman who's made my life hell. Who's called me useless and stupid. Who's hit me and starved me and treated me like I'm less than human. I didn't know. It doesn't matter, Grace screamed. It doesn't matter if you knew or not. You're a cruel person, Mama. Rich or poor, back then or right now, you're cruel. And knowing we share blood doesn't change what you've done to me. The word Mama hung in the air between them like a curse and a prayer. Let me ask you something that matters. If your mother abandoned you at birth, then spent 8 months beating and degrading you without knowing who you were, could you forgive her when she finally found out? Does ignorance excuse cruelty? Does regret erase abuse? Subscribe and turn on notifications because the next 5 minutes will answer whether some betrayals are too deep to heal, even with blood ties. Comment, forgive or never, tell us what you would do in Grace's position. Share this video with anyone who thinks biological connection automatically means family. Sometimes DNA just means you share chromosomes with your trauma. What happens next will determine if redemption is possible when it comes too late. Aduni pressed her hands to her chest. Her breathing had become labored. I can't breathe. Ma? Grace's anger gave way to concern. Are you okay? My heart, Aduni gasped. Oh God, my heart. She collapsed. Grace screamed. If you've ever wondered what regret looks like when it's too late to fix anything, keep watching. Because what happens next will break you. Subscribe now if you believe in consequences, in karma, in the weight of choices we can never take back. Like this video if you think Grace should forgive her, or comment if you think some things are unforgivable. This isn't just a story about a maid and a madam. It's about what happens when the past catches up to you at exactly the wrong time. The ambulance arrived within 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. Grace rode with Aduni to Lagos University Teaching Hospital in Idi Araba, holding the hand of the woman who had tormented her, the woman who was her mother, the woman who was dying. Please, Aduni gasped as the paramedics worked on her. Grace, please. Save your strength, Ma, Grace said, though her own voice shook. No, I need to tell you. Tell me later, when you're better. There might not be a later. Aduni's eyes locked onto Grace's. That's why I need to say it now. A monitor beeped frantically. The paramedic called out numbers that meant nothing to Grace. I was poor, Aduni said, fighting for each word. So poor I couldn't afford to feed myself, let alone a baby. Your father was from a rich family. When I told him I was pregnant, he gave me 5,000 naira and told me to disappear. I had no mother. My father was useless. I was 19 and terrified. Grace's tears fell silently. Sister Mary told me about a couple who wanted a baby, and they paid 50,000 naira. Back then, that was more money than I'd ever seen. I told myself you'd have a better life, that I was doing the right thing. And were you? Grace asked quietly. No. Aduni's voice broke. I was selfish. I was a coward. I took the easy way out and spent the rest of my life trying to convince myself I'd saved you, when really I'd just abandoned you. The ambulance pulled up to the hospital. Doors flew open. Nurses rushed forward. Wait. Aduni grabbed Grace's hand tighter. The money, I used it to start my business. Every naira I have came from selling you. My whole empire is built on the worst thing I ever did. They wheeled her into the emergency room. Grace tried to follow but was stopped by a nurse. Are you family? The nurse asked. Grace paused. Was she? Biologically, yes. But family was supposed to mean something more than blood. Family was supposed to be safe, loving, everything Aduni had never been to her. Yes, Grace heard herself say. I'm her daughter. The nurse's expression softened. Wait in the family room. We'll update you soon. Grace sat in the sterile waiting room, surrounded by strangers facing their own emergencies. She stared at her hands, the same hands that had scrubbed Aduni's floors, washed Aduni's clothes, prepared Aduni's meals. The same hands that came from Aduni's body. A doctor appeared 2 hours later. His face told Grace everything before he said a word. I'm sorry, he said gently. We did everything we could. Her heart couldn't take the strain. The combination of the shock and her pre-existing condition. She went into cardiac arrest. We couldn't bring her back. The words seemed to come from very far away. She's dead, Grace asked, needing to hear it clearly. Yes, I'm very sorry for your loss. Loss? What had she lost? A mother she'd never really had? A woman who'd abused her for months? Or the chance at something that might have been given time? Can I see her? Grace asked. The doctor nodded and led her to a small room where Aduni lay on a bed, finally at peace. The permanent scowl she'd worn in life had softened. She looked younger, vulnerable. Grace stood beside the bed, looking down at the only blood relative she'd ever known. I don't know if I can forgive you, Grace said to the body. Maybe someday, maybe never. But I want you to know, I survived. Despite everything, despite being abandoned, despite the orphanage, despite you, I survived. And I'll keep surviving. She reached out and touched Aduni's hand one last time. I hope you find peace, Mama, even if you never gave me any. This is the moment that breaks everything. A mother died full of regret. A daughter stands over her body with forgiveness still trapped in her throat. Some conversations can never happen. Some apologies come too late. Some wounds remain open forever. If this scene just destroyed you emotionally, hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories that make you feel something real. Like this video if you've ever lost someone before, you could say what you needed to say, before forgiveness was possible, before healing could happen. Comment below, I forgive you if you think Grace should let it go, or some things are unforgivable if you think death doesn't erase abuse. The story isn't over yet. Grace just inherited everything her mother built. But what will she do with blood money? Keep watching to see how this ends. Then she walked out of the hospital and into the Lagos night, finally free. 2 weeks later, the lawyer's office was in Victoria Island, all glass and expensive furniture. Grace sat across from a man in a crisp suit who kept glancing at her threadbare dress with poorly concealed confusion. Miss Grace, he said carefully, I've reviewed Mrs. Williams's will. She updated it 3 days before her death. Grace's eyebrows rose. 3 days before she died was the day she'd discovered Grace was her daughter. She left everything to you, the lawyer continued. The house in Lekki, the business, the bank accounts, all of it. Grace stared at him. What? There's also a letter. He slid an envelope across the desk. She asked that it be given to you after her death. Grace's hands shook as she opened it. Aduni's handwriting was elegant, careful. My daughter, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. What I did to you, both 23 years ago and in the months you worked in my house, is unforgivable. I've spent my whole life running from guilt, building an empire on money I got from selling you, treating people badly because I hated myself. The cruelty I showed you was just a reflection of the cruelty I showed myself every day. I'm leaving you everything because it was always yours anyway. I built this life with money I got from you. It's only right that it returns to you. But more than that, I'm leaving it to you because you deserve better than what I gave you. You deserve a chance at the life I stole from you. I hope you'll use this money differently than I did. I hope you'll build something beautiful instead of something born from guilt and shame. I wish I had been brave enough to keep you 23 years ago. I wish I had been kind enough to recognize you 8 months ago. I wish I'd been strong enough to be the mother you deserved. But I wasn't. I was weak and cruel. And now I'm dead. All I can do is hope that somewhere, somehow, you'll find happiness despite me. Your mother, who never deserved the title. Aduni Grace folded the letter carefully. Tears ran down her cheeks. But she wasn't sure who they were for, the mother she'd lost or the mother she'd never really had. Miss Grace, the lawyer prompted gently, do you accept the inheritance? Grace thought about it, thought about refusing it, thought about walking away from everything Aduni had built on the back of abandoning her child. But then she thought about something else. She thought about the other girls at the orphanage who had nowhere to go when it closed. She thought about young women selling their bodies because they had no other options. She thought about 19-year-old girls facing impossible choices with no support. Yes, Grace said, I accept it. The lawyer looked relieved. Excellent. We'll begin the transfer process immediately. Grace stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. I want to establish a foundation for young mothers who can't afford to keep their babies. Free childcare, job training, housing assistance, everything they need so they never have to make the choice my mother made. The lawyer blinked. That's very generous. It's necessary, Grace corrected. Can you help me set it up? Of course. Grace walked out of that office a wealthy woman. But wealth wasn't what made her feel different. What made her feel different was purpose. Aduni Williams had built an empire from guilt and shame. Grace Okoro would build something better. She'd build it from forgiveness, not of Aduni, but of herself. Forgiveness for all the times she'd wondered if she was unlovable. Forgiveness for believing she deserved the abuse. Forgiveness for carrying shame that was never hers to carry. 3 months later, the Aduni Williams Foundation opened its doors in Mushin, the same neighborhood where both Aduni and Grace's stories had begun. On opening day, Grace stood in front of a crowd of young mothers, social workers, and community members. My mother made a mistake 23 years ago, she said. She was young, poor, and scared. She made a choice that haunted her for the rest of her life. She died full of regret, never having forgiven herself. She paused, looking at the faces in the crowd, women who reminded her of the mother Aduni had been at 19. This foundation exists so that no woman has to make that choice again, so that poverty doesn't force you to choose between your future and your child's life, so that fear doesn't make you give up something precious. A young woman in the front row was crying. I can't bring my mother back, Grace continued. I can't change what she did to me, but I can change what happens next. We all can. Later, alone in the foundation office, Grace looked at the only photo she had of Aduni, taken at some business event, smiling for the camera, eyes empty. I don't know if I've forgiven you, Mama, Grace said quietly. Maybe I never will. But I'm going to make sure your death meant something, that your regret became someone else's redemption. She placed the photo on her desk, next to a small plaque that read, In memory of Aduni Williams. May her mistakes teach us and her legacy serve others. Then Grace got to work. Because the best revenge against the past isn't hatred, it's transformation. It's taking the worst thing that ever happened to you and turning it into the best thing you ever did for someone else. And that's exactly what Grace Okoro intended to do. The end. If you made it to the end, you just witnessed one of the most tragic circles closing. A mother who sold her daughter, a daughter who survived despite everything, a terrible revelation, a death too soon, and a legacy redeemed. Before you go, subscribe because stories like this remind us that our choices echo across decades, and the people we hurt might be closer than we think. Like this video if you believe Grace made the right choice by accepting the inheritance and transforming it into something good. Comment below, could you have forgiven Aduni if you were Grace? Or are some betrayals too deep to heal? Real talk. This story is about more than just a maid and a madam. It's about cycles of trauma, the weight of guilt, and the power of breaking generational curses. Share this with someone who needs to hear that. Your past doesn't define your future. Cruelty often comes from unhealed pain. The best way to heal is to help others avoid your wounds. Remember, blood makes you related, choices make you family, and forgiveness, when it comes, is a gift you give yourself, not the person who hurt you.